This episode is brought to you by the Honeymoon Playbook. The Honeymoon Playbook offers ideas for sex, romance, and play. This Amazon best-selling and award-winning book is written by our very own sex educator and relationship coach, Marie-Claire Thauvette. Check it out on Amazon and go get your copy today. Honeymoon Playbook. Light a romantic fire in your relationship.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to The Passion Perspective, a look at everything in the world of sex and relationships today. My name is Emily.
And I'm MC Thauvette.
And our guest today is one of MC's esteemed colleagues. We absolutely love her. We have Dr. Laurie Mintz. So Dr. Mintz is a feminist, author, therapist, professor, and speaker whose life's work has been committed to helping people live more authentic, meaningful, and joyful lives through the art and science of psychology. As a tenured professor at the University of Florida, she teaches the psychology of human sexuality to hundreds of undergraduate students each year. She's published over 50 research articles in academic journals and 6 chapters in academic books. She's received numerous professional and teaching awards. She's a fellow of the American Psychological Association, and she's the author of 2 popular press books, one of them being our absolute favorite. They're both wonderful. Both of them are written with the aim of empowering women sexually. So we have Becoming Cliterate, Why Orgasm Equality Matters and How to Get It, and A Tired Woman's Guide to Passionate Sex, Reclaim Your Desire and Reignite Your Relationship.
Okay. So happy you're here, Laurie. Dr. Mintz.
So happy to be here.
Dr. Mintz is actually a friend of mine. We've met at the ASECT conference a couple times, and it was so beautiful to see you speak, Dr. Mintz. She had standing ovations, and when she was talking about cliteracy, our group of women at our table all stayed, and we skipped the next presentation because we had to discuss how to make the world more cliterate.
Absolutely. Lots of fun. It was fun.
Yeah. It was so fun. You did such a great job. So you're doing so well out in the world. You did a TED Talk. I was so proud of you.
Thank you.
It sounds so great. So we'll dive right in and ask you some questions. So welcome to the Passion Perspective, Dr. Mintz. So there's so many people out there that need to learn that there's a clitoris gap out there. And let's just dive right in and talk about that, and, talk about how sad it is that women aren't getting pleasure. So go ahead and tell us what what do we need to tell people out there so that there's no longer a clitoris gap?
Okay. So the bottom line is that when women and men, heterosexual women and men, cisgender, heterosexual women and men get it on, the men are having way more orgasms than the women are. So let me just pull one stat out. I could pull more, but in one study, 39% of women versus 91% of men said they always or usually always orgasm during a sexual encounter. Now, that study didn't ask the context of the sex. Was it a relationship? Was it a hookup? But what we know from other studies is that the gap is largest in hookup sex, the orgasm gap, but smallest in relationship sex, but it never closes altogether. Men are having way more orgasms than women are. There's a lot of reasons for this culturally, but the number one reason is because women are not getting enough clitoral stimulation. In one study, 73% of women's orgasms problems were attributed to not enough or not the right kind of clitoral stimulation. I could go on, but I'll stop there and see if there's some follow-up questions.
Okay, sounds good. Do you have any follow-up questions, Emily?
I do. I think it's so interesting. You said, there's a few reasons, one of them being cultural. I feel like there's a really common narrative that the reason for the orgasm gap between men and women largely comes down to physiology, which I suppose in a sense it does, but I think more so there's a cultural narrative that just women are less able to, it's less, not convenient, but in a way convenient. It's not as easy for women physiologically to orgasm as men. And I wonder if there's any truth to this, if this is a myth that needs to be completely dispelled, and kind of what your take is on that.
I love that you asked that question. Yes, that there's a narrative that the reason for the orgasms gap is because women's orgasms are difficult or elusive, that our bodies are harder. Well, I disagree with that completely. And the reason I disagree with that completely is because when women pleasure themselves, 95 to 98% reach orgasm easily and within minutes. And when women get it on with other women, there's no problem with the orgasm. It's only when the penis enters the picture, or the vagina, that there's an orgasm gap. And so it's cultural. It's the fact that we consider penetration the most important act. We revolve heterosexual sex around it. And then we go, ooh, why aren't women orgasming? It's because women do not most reliably orgasm from intercourse alone, yet we consider it the main event, right? We revolve the whole encounter around it. So no, I don't think it's because women's bodies are difficult. I think the orgasm gap is completely a cultural problem, because we devalue women's most reliable route to orgasm, which is external clitoral stimulation.
And why is it that we have that in our society? Why is it that we don't have, why aren't we educated already? I know you're doing a good job of educating all of us, and Emily and I are doing it too. Our very first show was called Miss Clitty.
Yes.
I wanted to make sure that was what we had as a topic on our very first show. So yeah, what's happening out there in society? What's happening out there in our culture?
I think it's so deep and it's so old, and we could go back, centuries and centuries around the devaluing of women's orgasms, the devaluing of women's sexuality, the fact that the clitoris has been omitted even from medical textbooks until recently. And some people say, well, it's because of procreation, like we need intercourse to have babies, so that's the most important. But Cher Hite, who recently passed away, and she was a real clitoral heroine. If we don't know who she is, I'll come back to that. Yeah. She basically said in one of her later articles, like, that does not account for the strength with the female orgasm has been dismissed. So I think it has to do, honestly, with misogyny, with the privileging of the male experience, with sexism. It's everyday sexism in the bedroom. And I'm not blaming men. I mean, people are always like, you must hate intercourse, you must hate men. It's like, no, actually, I've been married to one very happily for over 30 years. I like intercourse, I enjoy it. But like most women, I don't orgasm from it. I don't hate intercourse. I don't hate men. I just value women's most reliable route equally to men's most reliable route.
And your husband knows where your clitoris is.
He is quite cliterate. Yes, he is.
Good for him. So yeah, so it's out there. I gave workshops to couples, and the men that I gave workshops to were dying to know how to pleasure their women. I think they really wanted to learn this. I think they're thirsty, but because of pornography, because of movies, they have not been taught this. And I do think that men want to pleasure women. Can you talk a little bit more about that?
Yes, absolutely. So first of all, I have had the same experience with workshops and men in my class. They want to do this, but I think what I see, and there was a really interesting research study done where it was found through these vignettes. I can describe it if you want, but the bottom line finding is that men consider women's orgasms a reflection on their masculinity. Like, they want to pleasure women, and the narrative that they don't care. My philosophy is there's probably some men like that. If you find one, run fast.
Run fast. Yes,
go.
Goodbye.
Because a man who is interested in your pleasure in bed is going to be a good partner outside of bed, and one who's not interested. But they've been misguided as well, that they think Like they want us to orgasm, they want to give us an orgasm, but they've been misguided. Because of using porn as a model and no sex ed to correct it, that they think the way to do it is lasting long, thrusting hard, and such a great irony, right? Because if men stand to benefit from cliteracy as well, because it, and Ian Kerner's done some great writing on this in the book, She Comes First, A Thinking Man's Guide to Pleasuring a Woman, that once men know how to use their hands, their tongue, their whole body,
And sex toys.
Instead of just their penis, it takes the pressure off of them and it makes sex better. It's like a turn taking.
Yeah. And I have to say, the very first clitoral orgasm I ever had was with a penis rubbing on my clitoris, which felt so good. So we can't leave that out. The clitoris can feel very good on the penis, can feel very good on the clitoris.
Absolutely.
The beautiful texture and the connection. Like, why not?
Absolutely.
We can keep it going there. I think it would be a really good idea for us to talk about pleasure anatomy. Tell us about the anatomy and the pleasure zones of the clitoris and all the area where you can find pleasure.
So I always like to say, like, wherever you like to be touched, that's a pleasure zone.
Exactly.
I have a friend who actually, literally, she told me she orgasms when her partner like nibbles on her ear. Now, so that's her pleasure zone. That certainly doesn't do it for me. I need a little more direct clitoral stimulation. My ear won't do it, but wherever you like it. But in general, what we know is that the vulva, which is, and I wish that there was a visual to go with this, because I get out my vulva puppet, which I know you have one too.
I have one. I could go get it. Yes.
But no one can see us, so that would, except us, so that wouldn't be good for the podcast. But the bottom line is the vulva is the external portion of the genitals, and it is chock full of touch-sensitive nerve endings, and that's on the mons, which is that fatty mound above sort of the genitals. The inner lips are chock full of touch-sensitive nerve endings. The clitoral hood, the clitoral glands are under the hood. They have so many nerve endings. They're often painful to touch. I also, since I've been talking about cliteracy, I've had several people say, something's wrong with me. I don't like mine touched. It's painful. Nope, that's fine too. If it's whatever, wherever you like to be touched, however you like to be touched. But in general, all the nerves that women need to orgasm are on the outside of their genitals, not the inside. The vaginal opening is chock full of sensitive nerve endings. The inner 1/3 is, but the upper third of the vagina has no touch sensitive nerve endings. It has all pressure sensitive nerve endings, which is why penetration will feel good when you're aroused. But again, anatomically speaking, the nerves you need to orgasm are on the outside, not the inside for most women. But I also have talked to women who say, I orgasm from penetration. I don't want to set up any one way of orgasming as bad. There's no bad way. But what is the problem is that culturally, we've been set up to think that only vaginal stimulation orgasms are the best, and that's just not true.
And that ties in. So actually, just before we started this, MC and I were talking about how prevalent it is kind of in mainstream media, the number of spots, quote unquote spots, and different types of orgasms. Like there's the C spot, there's anal orgasms and cervical orgasms and vaginal orgasms and clitoral orgasms and eargasms and nipplegasms. Like there's so many, like there's all of these labels on these things. And we were wondering, I know you talk about this in your book, but the importance of the language that we use when we talk about orgasm and how that's different between men and women, because I know there are a few different, again, spots for men, but it doesn't even equate, like it's nowhere near the number that are talked about when we talk about women. And again, I would love to know your kind of thoughts and what you say about this.
I am so glad you asked this question. We have like such a long history of differentiating clitoral orgasms, vaginal orgasms, blended. And by doing so, we use it to declare one superior to the other. And, there's so many pop stuff out there about it. And here's the thing that I really feel so passionate about. Like, people will ask me, are there different kinds of orgasms? And for women. And my answer is, scientists are still debating, and there's good evidence on both sides of the coin. But and I can go over that evidence, but my bottom line is why? Why are we even asking this question? Because we don't call men, we don't label men's, and I think this is what you were kind of getting at. We do not label men's orgasms by the type or point of stimulation. Oh, I had a blowjob orgasm. Oh, I had an intercourse orgasm. Oh, I had a manual hand job orgasm, even though those are all stimulation of the penis. But still, we don't label their orgasms by the type of stimulation and then declare one better than the other. And I think attention to this question, all it does is it sets up a hierarchy and has women try to strive for something their bodies may not be most comfortable doing.
Can you tell us a little bit about the clitoral legs and how far they go? And is there a connection with the G-spot?
Okay, so the clitoris is a vast internal and external organ. So the outside of it that you see is usually just the glands and the hood. And also, if you want, the inner lips actually create the hood. So some people consider say we should be calling our entire genitals a clitoris instead of a vagina. But inside there is clitoral bulbs and clitoral legs, and they surround the vaginal canal, and they get their own version of an erection. So it's a huge internal organ. And what we are calling the G-spot isn't a spot at all. It is an area that can be felt through the front of the vaginal wall, and it includes the legs of the clitoris, part of the bulbs of the clitoris, the urethral sponge, which is a spongy tissue that wraps around the urethra. It includes part of the vagina. So it's not a magic spot. It's really, scientists call it the clitoral urethral vagina complex, because it's all of those organs. And what we know about G-spot stimulation is some women can find their G-spot and they hate it. Some can find their G-spot and they love it. Some can't find it at all. But I agree with Betty Dotson, who said all the hype about the G-spot is setting us back to a Freudian era where we're all looking inside our vagina for some magical, mythical orgasm. And if you enjoy it, great. If you don't, great. It's all about what type of stimulation do you like, not the magic best type of orgasm to receive.
Right, exactly. So so what is the name of, like, what would you call all of this hype about the difference in pleasure? Like, what can we do to really make a difference and to really go out there into the world and really tell the world that, hey, this we've got to really do this. We've got to really teach people about clitoral education. We got to teach them about this. What do you have to say about that? What should we do out there in the world to really make a difference? Because I know when I'm watching TV and I'm with my friends and they're just humping and there's no clitoris action, I get so mad. And I feel like turning off the TV. And anything and eroticism, like erotica, if I'm reading a sexy part of the story and there's no clitoral action in the story, I just get mad. And I don't even want to continue listening if it's an audio or reading if I'm reading some erotica. So how do we educate people out there? How do we do that, Dr. Mintz? Like, what's our role?
I think you're doing it. Things like this podcast, things like writing blogs and books and articles, talking to our clients, calling out images. Like there's an Instagram handle I follow. They've just gotten a lot of attention lately, called the Clit Test. And basically they are trying to advocate for more realistic images in media. They have like shows that pass the Clit Test, shows that don't pass the Clit Test.
I love it.
Yeah. So I think when you're with your friends, like, follow that handle, support them, call it out, like go like, oh my God, I can't believe we're watching this show. He just stuck it in with no foreplay and she's having a huge orgasm. That's not how it works. And I think we need to just, and honestly, I think we need to talk to our clients, our students. But the thing that makes me maddest of all, and not to bring in all these things that make us mad, but here goes.
Yeah, let's do it.
Let's do it. What makes me maddest of all is when I see sex therapists and educators making statements about vaginal orgasms and teaching women to have vaginal orgasms. And it's like, yes, if you want to try to teach them something, that's fine, but it's more important to let them know this isn't a goal to achieve. And I think we really need to start calling people out professionally and personally. I mean, I've had colleagues who are supposed to be like sex therapists say things like, oh, I had my first vaginal orgasm, or I made my partner have one. And it's like, see, it's this insidious, like, oh, she finally did it. She finally achieved this great thing. We need to just start calling that out and really helping people understand there is no one better way.
And not call the vulva a vagina anymore.
Oh,
that's that really gets to me.
Yeah.
It gets to me too, because by doing so, and you've heard me say this before, but I'll say it for the people who haven't, when we call our vulvas a vagina, we're linguistically erasing the part of ourselves that gives us the most pleasure. And we are calling our entire genitals by the part that gives men the most pleasure, not us the most pleasure.
So
it's really sexism.
Yes, it is. What would you, I try to educate my clients on what positions they could be in so that women can have access to their clitoris if they want to stimulate it, either with their hand or with a sex toy. So what do you tell couples with whatever position, or how do you get them to have that conversation about, hey, I want to get into that position so that I can stimulate my clitoris? Like, some women are shy to talk about that, and some men might have a hard time accepting that, but I think most of them would. Certainly some of them might have a hard time with the sex toy. So I'd like for all three of us to have that conversation around how to talk about that. How do we bring that up?
So I can say first of all, like a lot of times I just start with the basic education that 95 to 98% of people with vulvas need clitoral stimulation to orgasm, the clitoris responds really well to vibrations, and that there's like different models to do it, but we have to get rid of the foreplay, sex, male ejaculation, sex over script. And there's turn taking scripts. You don't have to both orgasm during the same act. You can have, she comes first, oral sex followed by intercourse. She comes second. So for example, lots of fooling around, intercourse, then he comes out, and then you use your vibrator on yourself. Or if you do want to orgasm during the same act, and that act is intercourse, then there's different ways to do it. Like you're saying, get in a position where you can rub your clit against the penis or a body part, use a vibrator on yourself, use a couple vibrator. There's cock rings with extended clitoral vibrators that are fabulous. Or, get in a position where you can use your own hands or a vibrator. And in terms of what position that is, anyone where you can get your hands down there.
Exactly, where you've got space, because that's the thing. I think women need to find the space, and sometimes a guy will change position, and then you go, hey, I can't reach my clitoris anymore. What's going on here? And then you just have to be very assertive and just change positions. Like, you go for it and change positions, or, you know, like you said, you can have an orgasm after, maybe once, twice, 3 times, whatever you want. Keep it going if that's what you like. But I think that's an important point, is that to make sure that you have the space and to talk about that. So where do we talk about this? Like, when do we talk about this? Do we talk about it at that very moment? Because I could see some women getting frustrated at that point and just letting it all out. And that might not be the best time to do it. I think in your book you called it what did you call it?
Kitchen table sex
talk. Yes.
Yes. Yeah. I think it's really important not to try to solve sexual problems in the bedroom, that to have conversations outside of the bedroom. Like, hey, you know, I really love having sex with you, and I think you like to orgasm best in the missionary position, but I can't reach my clit that way. I'd love to try different positions where I can, and talk about it. You know, and there's like, women think, and this is part of that deep insidious sexism. Women say, "Oh, it's too pushy. I couldn't talk about the clitoral stimulation I need. That's pushy." And it's like, if we valued it, we wouldn't consider it pushy. Do you know what I mean? Like,
exactly.
it's not pushy. It's just saying what you need. And we have to get over that mindset that it's pushy, and that we have to get into the mindset that we deserve pleasure as much as our partners.
Yeah. And I think that I keep thinking there's so many questions. I realize they all relate to each other, like you said, because it feels like it's such a complex issue in so many ways, because it draws on so many historical and cultural and like all of these different things. But one of the big ones that I think it's important is even just the communication of sex and how people learn to do that or not learn to do it, as I think is the case for most people, or maybe not most, but a lot of people in North America. And so kind of, you know, for people like for you and MC who work with adults, but I think a lot of this would be solved if these conversations started happening much earlier. And I know in Canada and in the US, there's a constant debate about sex education and what's quote unquote age appropriate and what's not. And people get really riled up about it. So sometimes I feel like it sometimes feels almost hopeless to advance that conversation, because it always feels like it comes back to, well, whose responsibility is it to teach kids about this? Is it parents? Is it schools? Is it a third party? Who is it? And so I would love to know your thoughts on kind of how we approach learning about sex in the first place. Because I think for a lot of people right now, especially young men and boys, it's through porn. And for women, a lot of women don't really have anything until they're quite a bit older, and by quite a bit older, I mean oftentimes in their 20s, 30s, sometimes later than that. So I would love to know your thoughts just about, how we approach the topic of sex education and how we learn how to communicate so that it's easier to have those kitchen table sex talks, as you were just saying.
Unfortunately, we have such a terrible sex ed system here. You know, it's all about don't do it, or, you know, how to prevent dangers, nothing about the clitoris, nothing about pleasure, you know, nothing about porn literacy. And I do think if we had a better sex ed system like they have in the Netherlands, where it starts early, they label the clitoris, they talk about it, I think we'd be so better off. I don't have a lot of hope for that happening in our country anytime soon, unfortunately, but I did just read something really interesting, and it was that the biggest difference is parents. It doesn't matter what the parents say, because parents have different values, but, you know, it doesn't matter if it's a parent saying, you know, go have fun sexually, but use birth control, or wait until marriage, or it's the fact that the parents are talking about it that is positive outcomes, is this study I read. And that if so many parents say, we don't want sex ed in this school, that's our job, but we don't have parents who know how to do it. So lately I've been thinking about, what if we mandated parenting classes, and those parenting classes included sex ed, you know, but I don't think we'll get there either. But I think education would solve. I mean, I think if we had pleasure-oriented sex ed, we'd also have less sexual assault, less sexual pain. because if we teach women that you expect pleasure, you're going to be more likely to recognize coercion and pain.
That's right.
Yeah. And I know I'm pretty sure in the book you talk about, like in Denmark, for example, or maybe it was the Dutch, I can't remember, but they actually show pornography in classrooms and then discuss it. And I was like, can you imagine the outrage if that happened here? There would be lawsuits all over the place. But I think that kind of literacy is really important, and it's kind of neat. I know like Pornhub, for example, started a whole platform that's education based. And I always thought that's such a great step in the right direction. I think that a porn company is, and there's lots of, I think there's a lot of discussion about that in the feminist porn movement, if you want to call it that, or sort of women friendly pornography, that is there. But yeah, and this comes back to the communication thing. Like, I think a lot of the reason parents sometimes struggle to talk about it is they've never been taught how to talk about it. And it snowballs into this thing where no one really knows how to talk. And like you said, I think that also ends up playing into some really serious issues. And for women in particular, when it comes to safety, learning how to communicate, being comfortable communicating is on both parties is so important. And I was wondering so how do we train ourselves to develop kind of effective sexual communication? What are things that people can start doing at different ages to help facilitate that?
See, this is such a good question. And I so appreciate you bringing up the communication piece. I mean, honestly, sexual communication, I think of it's just a subset of good general communication.
Mm-hmm.
And unfortunately, we don't teach that either. We don't teach conflict resolution, making your needs known. So, I mean, I'd start with just learning really good communication and then transfer that to sex. Like that it would be nice if people could talk about, what position do we want to use tonight with the same kind of level of comfort as what do you want to have for dinner tonight?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And we need to just start teaching people, women especially, to say what they want and need and say it clearly, and having these conversations. I'm not sure I answered your question though.
Well, it was a pretty broad question, to be honest.
It's just a conversation. It's good. I just want to chime in and say, like with a lot of my dating clients, they ask me, when should I have sex? Like, when is it a good time to have sex? I say to them, getting the sexual energy going is super positive, like feeling that and letting time go by and really enjoying that. Because if that's the person you're going to end up with, it's really good to keep that sexual energy going and to really enjoy that stage. But most importantly, it's important for you to be able to talk before you even have sex about what you enjoy. And if you don't let a little bit of time go by, you might not be comfortable to talk about that right away. Sometimes, you need to get to know a person. That way you're going to be sure to have a really good first sexual experience to get whatever your needs are, to, make sure that they're met and make sure that you're having a good time that you're going to remember. So what do you say about, like, I saw the first time hookup sex studies in your book, and you've taught these young people that hook up. Please dive in and tell us about what they think about dating and first time hookup sex, etc., and the stats associated to that.
Yeah, well, I certainly can't tell you what they all think because it differs, right?
Yes, of course.
So some of them are like really like hooking up. Some hate it. Some hate it and do it anyway. That part feels really sad because it shows me just how much pressure. And I've heard a lot of young women say there's like this pressure, like, don't wait too long or you're uptight, but don't do it too soon or you're slutty. It's like there's some magic number, like,
yeah.
And so, what I've found is we do know that hookups are not as pleasurable for women as they are for men. That's the biggest orgasm gap is in hookup sex. But does that mean people shouldn't hook up? To me, it's a personal choice. But I always say to my women clients and students, but if you are going to hook up, you might as well enjoy it.
Yeah.
And we also know from the research that better sex decreases hookup regret. So if you are going to hook up, then make sure you get your needs met. I gave this lecture, and a student told me the next day she changed her Tinder profile to say, I'm into closing the orgasm gap. And it opened the conversation before she even met up with anyone.
Oh, yeah. I'll bet you she had lots of conversation. You know, a lot of people attracted to that was also interested in communicating in the same way.
Right. So
that's so interesting.
It opened, like somebody said, well, that sounds like a lot of pressure. And she said, not a lot of pressure at all. You just have to not weird out when I touch my clit during intercourse.
Love it. I love that.
And he was like, that's okay. So it opened the conversation. But for many people, those conversations are not comfortable till they know someone. And for that person, I think they are better off waiting till they actually are able to have a kitchen table sex talk. And I do have experience with 2 young women lately who had been doing a lot of hooking up and enjoying it to some extent, and they decided to try something new and date someone and do just what you said, like wait longer till they really had a connection with this person. And they both, I mean, this is an N of 2, it's not a big study, and I don't want to be saying anything anti-hookup. I'm only anti-hookup where the women aren't getting their pleasure.
Exactly.
But they did end up in relationships with these people because they did get to know them before they had this stuff to work out.
Right.
So I do think there is some benefit to what you're saying, but I also don't want to shame people who hook up.
Oh God, no.
But I do want to shame people who hook up the men who are not pleasuring the women. So if in the hookup, it's got to be equal opportunity hookups.
Yes. And if you want to hook up for the first time and you say, this is what I want, go for it. Good for you.
Exactly.
If that's what you want to do and you're okay, it comes down to asking for what you desire. That's what it comes down to. That's the bottom line. And I think it's really good to wait. If you don't feel comfortable talking about it right away, just do it whenever you're ready, and it'll happen.
I think too, it's also asking what you desire, but also knowing what you desire. I think that's especially for a lot of young women. People don't know how, like, what they like or what they want, which is, I think, where the conversation about masturbation comes in. And again, there's, MC and I were talking about this before, but there's a study done recently that actually shows not only is there an orgasm gap, but there's also a masturbation gap. And so women are masturbating less frequently than men in the United States. And a lot of the reasons, though, are similar. It's that insidious kind of thing you were talking about, Dr. Mintz, where, there's cultural issues, there's all kinds of things that feed into that. But I think the idea of, again, this would probably be addressed if we had more sex positive education available, but the importance of self-discovery, that sounds a little cliche, but like self-exploration before even engaging in any kind of partnered pleasure, I think is super important. And it feels like, I don't know if, I'm sure you feel this way too, but for MC, like, I feel like we talk about this so often that there's part of me that's like, how is this not, how are we still here in this place in 2020 that is a novel concept, or that people don't know that already, kind of thing. And then it always comes back to just realizing how that's not necessarily encouraged, and in fact is actively discouraged. And for masturbation, that's not just for women. Like, I know for men too, there's a lot of stigma and shame and all kinds of things that can build into that. But I thought that was interesting that the orgasm gap and the masturbation gap both exist, and for not dissimilar reasons all the time by the looks of it.
I think that's so important. I mean, I think it's, and you two know this, but I'll say it for the listeners. The first step always in helping a woman have an orgasm is masturbation. It's like the most empirically supported technique to help someone learn. You've got to pleasure yourself and know what you like, but then the bridging the gap between what do I like by myself and what do I like with a partner And it's just like so obvious to me, but it's just so underutilized. The idea that the best, that you transfer your self-pleasure techniques to partner. You tell your partner, this is how I like it. Or you do it yourself.
Yeah.
While he or she is part of the act in other ways. But I could not agree more that masturbation is so important, and that masturbation gap and the orgasm gap go hand in hand, pun intended.
I teach my couples. I have my couples do couple play after every session because I want them to have fun. I don't always teach communication, etc. I always give an assignment, and I give them an assignment to do show and tell. And that's for them to masturbate and see what new pleasure feelings they might discover by touching themselves, and to try to come up with a few ways that they can show and tell their partner. So they meet each other the next night or that night, and they do a little show and tell with each other so that they can see what feels good. And then they try it on each other, and they can guide their hand and show them what feels good, etc. And I think that's something that everybody can do out there, is to have some fun and play with it a little bit more. Sometimes we just get too serious about all of this stuff, and so many people are shy about masturbating. It's just a natural thing that we do, and why don't we play a little bit more with it and have some fun with it?
Yes, I love that. I love that.
Yeah, yes. So do you have any more questions, Emily?
I think just kind of I know we're starting to wind down, but one of the main things I would, we've talked about how in North America, we don't necessarily see any institutional or systemic solutions coming into place. So I would ask what individuals can do moving forward to help alleviate this gap and to move into a more pleasure-centered, equitable orgasm society, if you will,
Right.
and your recommendations for that.
Yes. Sorry about that. I've
okay.
had a little ding that was not supposed to happen. Apology.
It's for your
No
husband to
worries.
tell him, time to come for dinner, dear. You've got 10 minutes.
No, I just forgot to turn off my phone, to tell you the truth. Which, by the way, keep your phones out of the bedroom.
Yes, do
Yeah,
that.
yeah. They interrupt sex. They also interrupt podcasts. But anyway, they're distracting. I think we're doing what we're doing. If society isn't going to take care of it, we need to take care of it. So individually, women masturbate. Tell your partner what you like. Bring your vibrator to the encounter if that's it for you. Listen to sex positive podcasts, follow sex positive people, read sex positive books, talk to your friends. Let's just break the silence and start talking about sexual pleasure.
Is there anything you want to tell us about your book, Becoming Cliterate, that people should know, like any tips that you have in there that people should know out there in the world? Because this is groundbreaking. It's really, it was a great book. It's the one I recommend to everybody. If anybody says, what's your favorite book? I'd say, Becoming Cliterate, Dr. Laurie Mintz. It just covers everything, I find. I just absolutely love it. Can you tell us more about your book and what you have? If we pick up your book, what would we be reading about?
Yeah, thank you so much. Because I respect you and your work and your writing so much. That means a lot to me. So Becoming Cliterate is a combination of cultural analysis and prescriptive self-help to close the orgasm gap. So the beginning is this cultural piece of what is the orgasm gap? Why do we have it? The language we use, like laying all that groundwork about this insidious sexism that is still in our bedrooms. And then the next part is self-help for women. So it's got a chapter on looking at yourself, learning your genital anatomy. It's got a chapter on masturbation. It's got a chapter on communication, both general and sexual. It's got a section on mindfulness, so turning off your brain when you're in the bedroom, and also fantasy, turning your brain on when you aren't in the bedroom. And then it's got a chapter on changing the sexual scripts, the things we've been talking about, other ways to do sex. And then it sort of goes back to the culture and ends with sort of a call to action about sex ed, etc. And then there's also a summary chapter in the book for men to read.
Yes, men need to read this.
Summarizes the whole book for a male point of view.
Yes.
And the thing I'm most excited about lately, I'm always excited to hear from readers that they've changed as a result of the book or become orgasmic, but 2 grad students did 2 separate studies on the book, and one found that compared to a wait list, so people who don't read the book, women who read the book become more satisfied, more aroused, more sexually assertive, better body image, more orgasmic, feeling more entitled to pleasure. And then the other study, and both published in peer-reviewed scientific journals, found that men who read the book become better sexual communicators, more knowledgeable about women's pleasure, and let go of damaging myths. There's a lot of the information in there that we've talked about today, but in a lot more detail.
Right. And men should be reading the whole book and not just the one chapter. They can get a lot out of it for sure. I highly recommend it to everyone. How can we find you, Dr. Mintz? How can people find you out there in the world?
So my website is www.drlauriemintz, so DRLAURIEMINTZ.com. My books are on wherever books are sold, Amazon, Barnes & Noble, indie bookstores. And I'm on social media, Twitter, Pinterest, Instagram, Facebook, all with the same handle, Dr. Laurie Mintz.
Yes, and I have the audio version also. So if you're a busy person and if you're a mom out there and you have to do the dishes because that's the only time you have to listen to your book, the audio version's also very awesome.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I really mean, your esteem means so much to me, and having you help me spread the word about becoming cliterate and making a world of orgasm equality. I really appreciate that.
Well, I really appreciate you being our mentor for sure. Thank you so much, Dr. Laurie Mintz, for coming on the Passion Perspective show.
Thank you so much. It was a pleasure.
Thank you. It was a pleasure for me too.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thanks everybody for listening to our show. It was such a pleasure to have Dr. Laurie Mintz on. And please do check out her book. I just keep following her because she's always got some beautiful surprises for us. She also has a really great TED Talk you can check out. All you have to do is Google it, TED Talk Dr. Laurie Mintz, and you'll find her. She's just amazing. Thank you so much, Dr. Laurie Mintz.
Thank you.
Thank you, everybody, for joining us this week. We are The Passion Perspective. I'm Emily.
And I'm MC Thauvette.
And if you have any questions, concerns, you can reach us at thepassionperspective@gmail.com.
And you can find me at relationshipbliss.ca. My Facebook page is Relationship Bliss. And the Honeymoon Playbook is available on Amazon.com.
Thanks, everyone.
Mwah.